Have you ever thought you were in control, only to find out someone else was quietly pulling the strings? That's exactly how this story begins, with a boat, a lake, and an HOA that thought it held all the power. At first, it seemed like a routine complaint. A simple letter slipped into my mailbox, stamped with the HOA logo in bold red ink. "Your boat violates community guidelines," it read. No explanation. No warning. Just an order to remove it immediately, or face thousands of dollars in fines. I remember standing there, staring at the letter, trying to process what I was reading. My boat. The one I've owned for years without a single issue. The one I kept neatly tied at the dock, far away from any shared spaces. It didn't make sense. But the HOA didn't care about sense, they wanted control. The letter ended with a thinly veiled threat: failure to comply may result in restricted access to the community lake. That's when I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because the HOA had just made a massive mistake. You see, there was one tiny detail they didn't know, a detail that would change everything. Because here's the twist, I don't just live near the lake. I own the entire thing. Every single drop of water, every inch of shoreline, every dock they think they control. And from that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be just another HOA dispute. This was about to turn into a battle. The next day, I decided to keep quiet and watch what the HOA would do next. Sure enough, they didn't disappoint. A formal notice arrived, this time hand-delivered by one of their board members, a woman named Carol, the kind of person who treated every minor rule violation like a federal crime. She stood on my front porch with a smug little smile and said, "We'll be issuing fines of $500 per week until the boat is removed. Community guidelines are very clear." I let her finish her rehearsed speech, nodding politely, but inside I was boiling. They had no idea the lake wasn't theirs to regulate, yet they carried themselves like kings and queens of the neighborhood. That's when I decided to play along, for now. I asked her calmly, out of curiosity, "Could you show me exactly where in your guidelines it says anything about my boat?" She stumbled for a second but recovered quickly, saying, "It's all outlined in section 14B. That night, I pulled out the HOA handbook and flipped straight to section 14B. And there it was, restrictions on boat sizes, dock usage, and lake access. They thought they had me cornered, but what the HOA didn't realize was that none of these rules applied to me. Why? Because the lake was on private property, my private property, and their community guidelines held zero legal weight over it. Still, I kept this little piece of information to myself, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal it. Because I had a feeling this was only the beginning. And the HOA was about to dig themselves into an even deeper hole without even knowing it. A week later, things took a sharp turn. I woke up to find a bright orange sticker slapped across the side of my boat: violation, removal required immediately. The HOA had also sent out a community-wide email, naming me directly and claiming I was endangering shared resources by keeping my boat on the lake. My phone buzzed non-stop that morning with neighbors forwarding the email, some confused, others angry, and a few downright hostile. I realized right then this wasn't just about my boat anymore, this was about humiliation. The HOA wasn't trying to enforce rules, they were trying to make an example out of me. But here's the thing about trying to embarrass someone who owns the very thing you're threatening to control: it usually doesn't end well for the aggressor. I decided to confront the board directly. That evening, I walked into the HOA meeting, where a dozen homeowners sat around a folding table stacked with papers, sipping coffee like they were running a Fortune 500 company. Carol, of course, was leading the charge. "Mr. Jacobs," she said with forced politeness, "you are in clear violation, and if you continue to defy us, we'll restrict your access to the lake entirely." I paused for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. Then I smiled and asked calmly, "And how exactly do you plan on restricting access to a lake that I own?" The room went silent. Papers stopped rustling. Coffee cups froze midair. For the first time, I watched the smug expressions on their faces slowly drain away as the weight of my words sank in. But instead of backing down, Carol doubled down. "Ownership or not, the HOA has authority here," she snapped. That's when I knew, this wasn't over. In fact, the real fight was only just beginning. The very next morning, I called my attorney and explained the entire situation. Within hours, we had the property records pulled up, crystal clear proof that the entire lake, the docks, and even the access roads surrounding it were legally mine. The HOA had absolutely zero authority to regulate anything on that water. Armed with those documents, I knew it was time to make my move. A week later, I invited the entire HOA board to a discussion at my property. They showed up expecting a negotiation, but what they walked into was a lesson in ownership. I had copies of the deeds laid out neatly on the table, highlighted and tabbed, waiting for them to see. As they skimmed the papers, their faces went pale. "You've been threatening me with fines," I said calmly, "issuing violations, and publicly shaming me in front of the community, all while trespassing on my property." The silence in the room was deafening. Carol tried to speak but stumbled over her words, realizing that their so-called authority had just evaporated in real time. Then, I dropped the final card on the table, a cease and desist letter drafted by my attorney, warning the HOA that any further harassment or attempts to control the lake would result in a lawsuit for damages. I watched their confidence dissolve completely. For the first time since this battle began, the board didn't look like a panel of enforcers, they looked like school kids caught cheating on a test. But even then, I could tell by the flicker in Carol's eyes that she wasn't ready to give up. And I knew exactly what was coming next, their most desperate, reckless move yet. Just when I thought the storm had passed, the HOA made one last desperate attempt to assert control. A week later, they sent out an official notice to every homeowner, claiming they were seizing management authority over the lake to protect community interests. It was a bold move. And a huge mistake. Within hours, I forwarded the letter to my attorney, who wasted no time firing back with a legal response that made everything crystal clear. They had no rights, no claims, and no authority over any part of my property. 2 days later, the board called an emergency meeting. I showed up, documents in hand, ready for whatever nonsense they planned to throw at me. But this time, the energy in the room was different. No smug smiles. No threats. Carol avoided eye contact entirely. Finally, the HOA president spoke up, his voice shaky. "After reviewing the legal documents, the board has decided to rescind all violations." Just like that, the fight was over. No fines. No restrictions. No more harassment. And the best part? The HOA was forced to send a public retraction email to the entire community, admitting their error. You better believe I printed that email and framed it in my office, a permanent reminder that standing your ground pays off. These days, my boat is still right where it's always been, and the HOA hasn't so much as mentioned the lake since. But every time I pass Carol on the street, she looks away without a word. I can't say I blame her. So, if you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, you're not alone, and sometimes, the best way to fight back is by knowing your rights better than they do. And if you want to hear more shocking HOA stories just like this one, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and tell us your HOA horror stories in the comments below.